So now we've finally reached the part where we can actually start building the actual guitar. So first thing to do is to get hold of the wood. Now it comes in various shapes and sizes, and you'll find that there are places to get it from. eBay is fairly good. You need to check the seller and check they've sold like thousands of things, and check that that they've got good ratings, and that way you can be fairly sure it'll be all right. There's also lots of luthiers, suppliers out there that do these kind of things, so have a dig around, do your research and see what you can find. The back and sides for the guitar normally come as in here, two pieces for the back, so you can see two small pieces. Sometimes we would have drawn a guitar shape on, and the idea is you join the two pieces together and you've got the back of the guitar. Now these come as a book matched set, so that means they basically take one piece of wood and they cut it in half along there, and when you open it up you see that you've got a nice matching grain pattern to give yourself a nice. Now the more you pay, the nicer the grain patterns usually, but beware, especially if this is your first guitar, you get a really nice complicated grain pattern, can be an absolute nightmare to plane down thinner, so beware of that. A nice simple cheap one, you should get these. Now these vary hugely in terms of price, in terms of what wood it is. Rosewood is good, gives you a nice sound, but there's lots of others that you can get. Have a look around, see what you like, pay what you like, but as I said, I recommend for your first guitar, get some fairly cheap stuff. Now the back usually comes with a set of sides as well, and the sides are more like this, so obviously long and thin. These will be book matched as well, so that which way around do these go? That way around. There we go. So that you get a nice grain pattern. Not so important to get it right on the sides because it's much more difficult to see. So there we are. Now the wood, when it arrives, is, you can see it's about, that's against my finger, it's about 5mm thick, and one of the first things that we need to do is to thin it down so that we can bend it, and also thin the back and the sides down so that we can actually have a decent sound. If you have these great big thick things, you won't get anything out of it. Same way, the soundboard comes as two bits of wood. In this case, it's just this is spruce. Spruce is usually used. It gives you a nice sound, and when when it starts to get thin, you can tap it and get a sound. And again, it comes as two pieces, as book matched. They tend to draw a guitar, so you know where they think you can put it. And there we are. So we will join those together, and then we'll thin them down as well. So that's all to do. Thinning down, the bit I find really dull. You basically have to take a piece and you take your plane and you have to plane it down to get it thinner. If you're lucky enough to have a planer thicknesser, you can pass it through that a few times to get close. We're looking, well, for the sides, and the sides I'll do first. We're looking for about 2mm, so we're looking to take about 3mm off that. So I use just a basic plane. If you're lucky enough to have a drum sander, that's the perfect tool. You just pass it to the drum sander, 10 minutes, it's done. Planing version takes a few more hours, but it gets the job done eventually if you're careful. So there we are. Now, in terms of building the guitar, I always like to start with the sides first, thin them down, bend them to shape, and then I leave them in the mould while I do everything else. And while they're sitting in the mould, then they're going to sort of relax to the shape of the guitar. So that usually makes them much better, and gives me something to do first. So let's get started. Let's start thinning this down. So one piece of wood, and we'll take our flat table. Now remember from the previous sessions, I built this with a piece of worktop that's got a piece of wood on the bottom. I bolted it in, I plumped it into my work table so it's nice and firm. Now, take the piece of wood. You often find there's a slightly rough side and a slightly more smooth side. I like to take the rough side first so that you can compare the two, because eventually you're going to be looking for which is the nicest side to use when you actually come to the guitar, which is going to be on the outside and which is going to be on the inside. So the first thing we do, we want to play around with the wood and see how the wood feels, because you will find that you can plane it in one direction but not in another. If you're playing it in the wrong direction, the plane will dig in and it'll take chunks out, it'll make a big old mess. So first thing we do is we can bolt this thing down. So you'll need a couple of bits of wood to hold it. And what we do, so if I'm going to plane this bit first, I want 2 bits of wood here clamped in so that it will hold it. So now you need to use G clamps for this, and not those sort of hand clamp things. There's little hand clamps that you squeeze because they're not strong enough and the wood will move about. If it moves about, you'll end up digging the plane in and making a mess. Now these bits of wood are really important, otherwise the clamps will mark the wood, which you really don't want. So that's nice and solid. Make sure it's done up tightly in the workmate, and get the plane. Now your plane needs to be really sharp for this. Now you can tell when your plane stops being sharp enough, and it will. You'll have to sharpen it several times. You'll tell because it becomes difficult. When it's hard work, then something's wrong. Okay, I'm going to start off then. Let's bring this a little bit closer. I'm going to start off. I'm going to be trying to find out which way the wood works. So I can run. I've got the plane set really with a very small sort of slice, so that it doesn't take great big chunks. I can just run the plane along. First of all, I can see it taking the wax off there. That seems to be all right in that direction. You'll find that if you do it diagonally, then that's best. If you go up and down, you're bound to find a point where it digs in. Let's try this way, see what happens. Now, this was not too bad, but there we go. So that's what happens. If you go the wrong way, it will dig in and it'll make a bit of a mess. It'll take a chunk out. You don't want that. So this is the stage where you figure out which way the wood likes to be worked, and then you can start to do it. If in doubt, if it seems to dig in both directions, then generally, if you go across the wood like this, across the grain, you will find that it won't dig in, and that's the way I do most of it. And you're sort of playing around with it, and you start to see. In fact, on this one, I can see. You see the bits that you've planed will be shiny, and the bits that are still rough sawn will be dull. So we just keep going on this bit until the whole thing looks shiny. And you can see how the plane's working. I'm not putting any effort at all into it. It's a nice sharp plane, it's just cutting nicely. So keep going. A couple of bits left where I can see the saw marks. Just like this little bit. And there we are. There's just cleaned up on that side. And then we can undo the clamps. Move the wood along. Now it looks like I'll probably have to do this in chunks of 3. So do that one up. And that one. And again, just following the same approach. Just take the top of the wood off. If you've got any nasty sort of, or interesting, shall we say, grain patterns, you can just play around and see which way they like to be cut. Because once you start to thin this down properly, you really don't want to be taking any big chunks. There we go. And then the final bit. Move these to the far end. Nice and tight, and then we just carry on and do the rest of it. Just taking off those saw marks. So we're not really thinning it down much at the moment. We're starting to, but not really. Again, just angle it up and down the wood to try and figure out which way that grain pattern wants to be worked. I'm just kind of feeling the wood, see which way it goes. Just branch it out and down this one. Trying to be nice and consistent as well. I don't want to start to introduce undulations into it. Okay, that's the first side done. Get rid of some of this. Now you need to keep cleaning up this, because if you'll end up with a mess everywhere, it'll end up making a mess of what you're doing. So clamps off for that, and you can see starting to get a much nicer. Well, you can see some plain marks in it there, but that's fine for now. We'll clean that up as we go. Now we've probably taken less than half a mil off there, and the best tool that you've got now, because what we're going to do is essentially repeat that ad infinitum until the wood gets down to about 2 millimeters. Is what we're looking for, so that we can bend it. These are excellent tools. It's got a nice long reach. You can see it's got a dial gauge. In fact, this one needs oiling, and it'll tell me what the distance is between these two little things here. So I can put this on, and it'll tell me that's still slightly under 5 mil. And you can run it up and down and just see where the thick and the thin parts are, because ultimately what we want to be doing is reducing that down to 2 mil. I'm going to be very, very careful to bring it down slowly. As we go, at some point we'll see that one of the surfaces will be nicer than the other. One of the surfaces, maybe you've taken a chunk out with the plane, something like that, or maybe something's got a mark on it that you don't like. So fairly soon we'll choose the nicest side. When you've got the nicest side, say okay, that's the side that's going on the outside. If you're playing it down so you're happy with it, stop working on that side, flip it over, work on the horrible side, and that way if you take any more chunks it won't matter. And when we start to get close to 2 mil, we'll swap over from a plane and we'll start using a cabinet scraper. First of all, let's start planing this down. Another top tip: if you don't have one of these gauges, in fact even if you do, sometimes you can make yourself one of these. So it's a piece of plywood, a bit of 18mm ply left over from building the mould. You cut it into that sort of shape with a gap here, and then you stick a pencil in. Now in this case it's a white pencil, because this is dark coloured wood and you just won't see it if you use normal sorts of pencil. And the idea of this, you put it into the wood like that, you adjust the pencil so it's just not quite touching, and you can run it around, and anywhere there's a high spot, you see the pencil will mark. So what you do, you plane this down a couple of times, and then you run this over it, and you just see where it's still got high spots, and then you clamp it down, you take the high spots back down again, and that way you'll get consistent thickness. As you reduce the thickness, you won't get sort of really thin in one place and fat in another. So that's quite a good little tool to use. I quite like that. Now as you go through this, you need to pay quite close attention. You'll probably find the way you plane it, you'll get a thinner side and a fatter side. You want to try and keep that nice and consistent. I've gone through this a couple of times, and we are starting to see a reduction. That's about getting to 4 mil now, so I've taken about 1 millimetre off it. So we need to keep going over it with my pencil device as well, and see how we go. So you can see now I've got this down to about 3 mil, so I've got another millimetre to go. And I've chosen a side. This side is much nicer than that side. This side's got a few chunks missing out of it. This is going to be the outside. I've marked it with an X with my white pencil. And one of the things you can do next, you can just clean this side up just a little bit to make sure it's all right. And you can do that with a cabinet scraper. A nice cheap sort of tool if you've never come across them before. What it is essentially a piece of steel with sharpened edges. So it acts like sort of almost like a plane on a very, very light scale. And what you do is you plant a bit of wood somewhere. Like this. And then you take your cabinet scraper, you put it at an angle, and you just push it forwards. Like this. And if it's sharp enough, you get these tiny little, like tiny little shave planings from a plane. And that'll just clean up the surface. And you just double check that you've chosen the right surface. And this one's looking all right. You have to be careful with rosewood because you get these little sort of blemishes that are hard to see. So you kind of hold it up to the light to see if it's looking okay. If it's looking okay, and that's good. We'll use that as the main surface. So that's going to be the outside. Next thing to do, obviously, is to plane it down now to 2mm. So, or at least get close. We'll probably go down to about 3.3 or so. And what I've been using, I've got one of these, a little caliper with a dial gauge. So you can sort of check up and down that you're okay. And this is sort of 3 and a bit. Obviously that only measures the outside. You can do both sides because sometimes you'll tend to favour one side and not the other. That's about the same. And the other thing you can do, if you take you one of these, and essentially you set it so it's just marking. You sort of find the thickest point, so it's just marking, and then you just draw lines up and down, and it will show you where the high spots are. And so that's really useful. So let's try that. Okay, and then from there you can just draw lines across. And you can see what's happened. It's hardly marks up here at all. And you get down to here and I'm starting to get lines. So I know that this bit's a little bit thicker. So I'm going to concentrate on that. You've got to watch the edges as well. So there is a tendency, so you can see that corner has gone thinner than that. So you need to keep an eye on that. Be very, very painstaking, very careful, and just slowly bring it down and down until it gets to round about 2.2, 2.3. You can take the rest of it then with a cabinet scraper off the top, and then you can also sand it if you wanted to get a really nice finish on the one side that you've marked. Don't forget to mark it or you'll find yourself planing the wrong side. I've done that before. So there we are. Let's do some more of that. More planing, more planing. Well, it seems like it's been a few hours now. I finally got this down to about 2 mil. So get it down to about 2.2, 2.1, and then you finish it off with a scraper just to bring it down to that final, because this takes off a lot less. You're getting quite close, and you're going with a plane. You could easily go too far. So this is pretty much 2 mil across now. With these thin ones, it's good. You can get one of these calipers on, and you can look. You can check all the way along and make sure that you've got the right thickness. And again on the other side. Once you get onto the back and sides, to the back and the front, sorry, you'll need something with a slightly longer reach. And indeed, this is telling me as well that we're around about 2 mil. So that's about right. And you can see the difference already. We've got one side, remember, that we've cleaned up with the scraper in the first place, which is the really good side. And we've got the side we've been planing, but we've cleaned that up as well with the scraper, because you want it to be nice on the inside and the outside. You want to do it properly, you're going to do a proper job. So both sides, but make sure to mark the outside with your white pencil so that you know which one's which when you come to stick it all together. You can see the difference here. You can see it's nice and flexible now, nice and bendy, which is what you want. Going back to the original, so this is the other one. Yeah, completely solid. So you you can see what a difference we've made. There's no way you'll bend that. This, on the other hand, nice and easy. You should be able to bend that bit of steam, and I'll show you how to do that in a later video. But there's the first one done. All in, it's probably taken me a couple of hours. I like to do a bit of planing, go in, have a cup of coffee, mess around. It's bonfire night. And then come back and do some more. So if you add it all up, it's probably about an hour and a half, 2 hours to do one of these. So now I've got to do another one. Here we go. So this time, when we start off, we're going to look at the grain pattern, because remember these were book matched. So we'll find the side that we want on the outside that's marked, and then we move it around so that we see which way round it is. I think it's that way. There we are, that's how they match. So I will then mark this as the good side and clean this up as the good side. So I've got two good sides that match, and then when I come to make the guitar, there'll be a nice match. Right, I'll get on with that now. Gosh, it'll take me another few hours. Okay, so I've got two finished pieces of wood now. The next thing to do is to thin them down to the right width. And in this case, it's about 100 or 110 millimeters. That's about the size of it. And first of all, I can look at them and I can say, okay, those are the nice sides that I'm going to keep with the nice grain patterns. And notice they're book matched, so decide which one's which. Now I can see, in this case, I've got a nick missing out of here. And in fact, on this one, I've also got a nasty little fault in the wood there. Now I don't want to be bending that bit, so ideally if I'm going to trim some off, I'm going to trim that side off. And of course the nick is in the other side, so the first thing I'm going to do, plane this down so it's flat, and you need to do that anyway. So what you need to do, take a straight edge and just see how flat and straight that line is, because at the same time as trimming off the sort of nasty lumpy edges, we're also going to make sure that that's completely flat, and then that'll form one side. We'll then draw a line down with the right width measurement, and that's it. Now that's going to be your final guitar width measurement, so you need to be careful to get it right. At least it's the measurement at the back end of the guitar. Obviously it tapers towards the neck end. So that's the first thing to do. Now what we're going to use is this arrangement. It's generally called a shooting board. So all I've got is a piece of something like 18-20 mil board, and then what I'm going to do is take this and the edge that I want to take off it, I'm going to put along the edge there, like so, and then the two blocks I'm going to clamp it in place so that it's just hanging over the edge, you can see there. And then I'll take my plane, and what I'll do is put the plane on its side, because all planes, believe it or not, have a square edge here. They're shiny on this side and this side, so what you can do is put it on its side like that, and then you can plane with it, and you know that the edge that it's planing, i.e. this one on here, is going to be square, which is nice. So that's what I'm going to do next. Okay, so that bit's done. I've now got a nice flat and straight edge. And I can do that by holding it up to the light, or you can put it down on a flat board that's light coloured. So that's good. So the next thing I can do, get rid of that. With a shorter ruler, I'm going to mark out the thickness that I want, in this case 110. So I've got my flat edge, and I know where the nasty little fault is that I'm going to chop off. So I can then just mark this out as accurate as we can. Just a few white dots. Like that. Which we can then join up with a bigger ruler. And again, if you put as many marks as you can, then if you get an outlier, chances are you'll be able to see where it is and not use it. It's going to be something like that, and then we just draw along there And there we are. And what we're going to do is cut that out on the bandsaw, not quite to the line, leave a little bit, and then back onto the board, and we'll use the plane to bring it back down to the line so we've got a nice accurate cut one. Okay, we'll do that next. So back to the bandsaw, here we go. Don't forget the extraction, so that goes in there, and then let's cut this out. And there we go. So, not right up to the line, leave a nice big gap in case you make a mistake. And let's go back to the board and connect it. And sort and plane it off. You can see, there we are, there's the fault, and I've cut it off, so good stuff. Keep that, be useful for later on. So here we go, same deal, thing on its side, and then we'll take off all the extra and all the rough edge down to the line. So that's that bit done. Again, I'm checking it against my straight edge, it's looking good. So there's one of the boards for the side finished, and the right width, not the right length yet, we'll cut it later on. So the next thing to do is make another one of these, and then we'll start to bend it. Now there's the subject of a whole video of its own. So that's the end for this time. You've made two sides and we're ready to start bending them. Hope you've enjoyed this video. Feel free to subscribe. Otherwise, I'll see you again next time.